Francisco Javier was born on April 7th in 1506 to a noble family in the castle of Javier, located in the town of Javier, Navarra, in northern Spain. His father, Juan de Jasso, was president of the Royal Council of the King of Navarre, and his mother was Maria de Azpilicueta. He was the youngest of 5 children: Magdalena, Ana, Miguel, Juan, and himself. His childhood was marked by the historical events that led to the departure of the French-controlled Kingdom of Navarre and their reintegration into the Hispanic reign, as his family was very much involved in those events. After having studied in different Navarrian cities, in September 1528 he went to study in Paris at the Sorbonne University, where he met his future best friend Íñigo de Loyola, later Saint Ignatius of Loyola. Íñigo de Loyola never left Francisco alone in the difficult times he faced while in Paris, and always helped him, especially when he suffered economic problems. On August 15, 1534, after completing their studies, the two friends made their vows of charity and chastity while promising to travel to the Holy Land. After participating in the spiritual exercises with Ignatius of Loyola, Francisco stayed in Paris 2 more years to study theology. In 1537, Francisco travelled to Italy with Ignatius of Loyola. In Rome, they visited Pope Paul III to ask for his blessing before embarking on the journey to the Holy Land, a trip that finally could not be taken due to the war which arose between Venice and Turkey. They arrived to Venice, and Francisco was ordained priest on June the 24th. During his stay in Venice, while waiting for the boat to go to the Holy Land, he decided to preach with his companions in the surrounding areas. Given the delay of the trip, they returned to Rome and offered themselves to the Pope to be sent elsewhere. So, the Portuguese ambassador in Rome, Pedro of Mascarenhas, asked Ignatius of Loyola on behalf of John III of Portugal for some of his men to be sent to India. For that trip, Francisco was named legate by the Pope to the lands of the Red Sea, the Persian Gulf, and Oceania, on both sides of the Ganges. He then left for Lisbon in 1540, starting one of the most important stages of his life, his missionary life. He stayed in Lisbon for a while, until he was appointed to go to India. During this time, he continuously preached the gospel to the poorest of the city. On April 7, 1541, the day he turned 35, he left the expedition and arrived on September 22nd to Mozambique. There he stayed until February of the following year. During that stay, he experienced the reality of the treatment of black people and worked to help the cause, leading him to have his first clash and conflict of this kind. After making stops in Malindi and Socotra, on May 6, 1542, he reached Goa, a city that would soon become the capital of the Portuguese India. He prepared an informative text based on the Catechism of Juan Barros and began to preach the Catholic doctrine in the city, while attending to those nearing death, visiting prisoners, and assisting the poor. To achieve a more effective approach, he dedicated himself to the learning of language of the country. After rejecting the post of director of the St. Paul's Seminary in October 1542, he embarked on a trip to the islands of Pearl Fishery Coast, where he remained for over a year. He evangelized the Paravas Indians and crossed the cities of Tuticorin, Trichandur, Manipur, and Kombuture. He also faced the opposition from Brahmins, who inhabited the region of Pagodas. He learned Tamil and translated the Christian texts to the language, as well as talking to the locals about heaven and hell. In November 1543, he met his companions, Miser Paulo and Mansilla in Goa, and was interviewed by the bishop of the city, Juan de Albuquerque, who was asking for missionaries. The bishop appointed 6 priests, and with the new collaborators, he returned to the Pearl Fishery Coast. On the trip, he wrote several letters to his companions in Rome, In one of them, he said, "Many Christians cease to exist in these parts, as there is no one to perform evangelization. They often stir my thoughts of going to those universities and shouting like a man who has lost his mind, and mainly to the University of Paris, saying to those of the Sorbonne who have more words than will, to prepare to bear fruit within them. How many souls stop going to glory and go to hell for negligence of them? It is as many as the multitude of those who turn to the faith of Christ in these parts, in this land where I walk, which often seems to have tired arms of baptizing, not to speak of the many times of saying the creed and commandments in their language and other prayers." In Pearl Fishery Coast, he established the allocation system of territories to a leader, which would keep him informed of the evolution of the mission. Once that territory was organised, he left for Manipur and the Southern District. He remained there for a month with the Maucos, baptizing more than 10,000 people. During the year 1544, he performed more than 20 evangelization trips. With the news of the execution of Christians in Ceylon, Francisco returned to Goa and spoke to the governor. In 1545, he left to Moluccas along with Juan Ero, arriving at Malacca shortly thereafter. Within 3 months, Francisco Javier learnt at least one other language and became familiar with the local culture. Also, with the help of knowledgeable people, he translated the basic texts of the Catholic doctrine. That same year, he wrote to the King of Portugal about the injustices and humiliations imposed on them by the Majesty's own officers. After preparing instructions for the catechists of the Society of Jesus, he set off to the islands of Amborio and Ternate in January 1546. He reached his destination after a month and a half, crossing different islands of the region and of Baranula, Ceylon. According to a legend, a crab returned to him the crucifix that was lost during the storm. In June, he reached Ternate, a rich commercial centre of spices and the last Portuguese stronghold, remaining there for 3 months. From there, he set off to the islands of Moro, where he spent 3 months. From the Moro Islands, he embarked on a journey back to Cochin, where he arrived on January the 13th in 1548. After performing work reorganization and supervision of missions in India and Maluku, he felt disappointed with the undergone deterioration as evidenced in his letters. Then, on Palm Sunday of 1549, he departed to Japan, along with his companions Cosme de Torres and Juan Fernandez and the translator Anjiro, reaching Nipponese land on August the 15th. They landed in Kagoshima, which then was the capital of the South Kingdom of Japan. He remained there for a year, and in Japan for 2 years and 3 months. In collaboration with his partner Pablo de Santa Fe, he evangelized on Nipponese land and got the Declaration of Articles of the Faith translated, which he memorized and recited on street corners. To answer the questions of passerbys, Francisco used an interpreter. Given the failure of the mission, he thought of meeting with the king of the area with the hope that if he would convert to Catholicism, the people would too. In 1550, he headed north with this intention. He established a small Christian community in Hirado. He arrived in Yamaguchi, then Sakai, and finally to Miyako, where he unsuccessfully tried to be received by the emperor. He moved to Yamaguchi again and obtained from the prince the guarantee of respect for converters to Christianity. Given this new perspective, along with his 2 companions, he started an intense work of preaching that yielded its fruit in the creation of a small Catholic community. Many of the converts were samurais. On the other hand, the opposition of the local clergy and the monks always remained strong. In September 1551, he called the Prince of Bungo, who allowed him to preach on those islands. A month later, Leaving behind some comforts, Francisco Javier returned to India alerted by the news that he received. The return trip was made in the Santa Cruz ship, captained by Diego de Pereira, who gave him the idea to organise an embassy in China on behalf of the King of Portugal to enter peace negotiations. When he arrived at Malacca, he found out that India had been named independent Jesuit province of Portugal and that he was declared as provincial. On January the 24th, 1552, he reached Cochin and Goa on February the 18th. After solving some mission problems and preparing for the trip, he left for China on April the 14th. When the ship arrived at Malacca, they had problems with the sea captain and the trip was delayed for 2 months. They reached the Shangshuan Island in late August 1552. This island was the meeting place for Chinese and Portuguese merchants. They kept waiting for the arrival of a Chinese boat that would clandestinely bring them to the continent. On December the 3rd, 1552, Francisco Javier died when he was only 46 years old. His body was taken to Goa, where it arrived in the spring of 1554 and was buried. His figure is recognized and revered worldwide. His apostolic zeal and missionary work were pioneering and decisive in evangelization and the spread of Christianity in Asia. He was canonized by Pope Gregory XV in 1622, along with Ignatius of Loyola and Teresa of Jesus.